You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property under laws they had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 411 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. And returning to the show today is Phil Gibson. Posts a lot of work at the Libertarian Institute, which is, of course, where you find this show. So, Phil, why don't you tell everybody about your projects, and then we'll get into talking about Trump.
Yeah, what's up, Kyle? Thanks for having me back. It's an honor and a privilege. So if anyone doesn't know, I am the host of the podcast, A Boy Named Sue. I've been pretty busy with work as of late. Kyle mentioned that I've been doing stuff at the Libertarian Institute as an editor or assistant editor, I guess. So if you got any submissions that you think would be a good fit for the site, send them on over. But yeah, I've been busy with that and just busy with real life in general. So I've been a little short on episodes, so I'm going to cut it back to just one a week, maybe two. But yeah, other than that, just staying up to date on foreign policy. I think I came to the right place to talk about that, or at least listen to what Kyle's got to say about that. And yeah, I'm just trying to keep it real and keep my head on straight with all the crazy crap that's going on in the world. If you want a good recap of what is going on in the world as of late, on Monday, I released an episode on my show. You can also catch this episode on the Q&A feed that Scott Horton puts out. But I released a Q&A session with Scott, and he basically just gave his 2 fiat cents of how he felt about the whole Syria debacle, or not really debacle, because as we'll get into and we'll all see, and we already understand that if America just, packs its toys and leaves, then it's a semi-prosperous potential area, and they can really just take care of themselves, as we are seeing. But as Kyle's about to get into, Trump wants to take all the credit. So I'll kick it back over to you, man.
Donald Trump gave this speech, and it was, fairly interesting. Phil, I know you at least caught a few minutes of it. I couldn't tell. Did you think Trump was reading off of a teleprompter, or if he was just just free-flowing with it?
Yeah, so it was kind of half and half, I think. Either way, it was a typical Trump speech. I was laughing within minutes in, because he's just Trump, and that's what he does. The way you said permanent ceasefire was in quotes, permanent ceasefire. Let me see here. I don't know. I jotted a few notes here. I mean, just his Trumpisms, no other nation, America, is very simple. No other nation. Okay, it's us that's running the ship. That kind of crap that he likes to throw around. And what I liked from it is that he was just really encouraging other countries to come out and help clean up this mess. So I guess he's taking credit for that much of it. But, I mean, either way, if he's going to take credit or not, other countries are going to come out and, work together despite their geopolitical differences and motives. It really just kind of goes to show that, we're doing more harm than good. So, I don't want this to be another Afghanistan 2.0 where, we just cause havoc, or, God forbid, our beloved Kurds, we create an Israel 2.0 where we have to give them their own little nation over there. But, as history has continued to repeat itself, we, as Charles Glass said, that with these Kurds, we use them and abuse them. And we saw that when we gave Saddam resources, and, he bombed them in the Anfal campaign with, weapons. And, this is nothing new. So I just found it hilarious how Trump was taking all the credit for this somewhat prosperity in the region, but then kind of it seemed on the flip side he wasn't at the same time. So it's very odd. But I mean, you saw the entire interview, Kyle. So what do you have to say about it? What am I missing here?
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought the whole thing was kind of in a sense all over the place. At times, I wanted to cheer on Trump, and at times he made me absolutely cringe. So, Trump is just such an interesting, kind of guy that I don't always understand what's going on with him. And
Do
so
you think he understands
I'm just
himself?
gonna yeah, I don't know. So I'm just gonna go ahead and full on admit that at this point I could say I really don't get it. At times on foreign policy he sounds great, and you think, oh man, this guy is on the right track. And then at other times he's like, oh, we're going to stay in Syria to defend some oil and leave 200 troops there. And it's like, dude, you just gave a whole thing. You had this whole big deal about how, a small number of U.S. forces in Syria really can't do anything. And they're just there to possibly be put in harm's way. And now you're going to say we're going to sit there for another, on a couple oil fields somewhere in northeastern Syria, which, I mean, who knows what oil fields he's even talking about, or if this is going to be something that even happens for more than 2 weeks. But I did have quite a few notes.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Just on that real quick, I mean, at least you can give the guy credit for being consistent, because wasn't he the one from the get-go being like, we should have never gone there, and if we did, we should have gone there and taken the oil and left. Wasn't that him that said that kind of crap?
Right. I guess I see what you're saying there. My point is just in terms of general strategy.
His reasons are ridiculous either way.
Right. I guess, maybe that's a good point that you're making there that I'm kind of missing about Donald Trump is that, I see it from he should understand what's logically going on in Syria and understanding how, just having a couple U.S. troops somewhere in northeastern Syria along the border with Turkey doesn't mean that, that area will magically be peaceful forever and remain in U.S. control forever. It seems like this is going to be the same situation, whatever oil fields that Donald Trump is trying to sit on with a couple more, 100 more U.S. troops in Syria. And you would just think that, I guess he would see that and him being all over the place with that. And at the same time talking about, bringing the troops home. And then at the same week, adding 2,000 more troops to the Middle East. I guess in a way he is kind of consistent. He has these little slogan things that he likes and he kind of believes in those and he says them over and over again. And so like you said, staying for the oil or taking the oil is something that this guy does seem to believe in. So maybe it is kind of something like that.
Well, he brings that businessman perspective to the table, but just like Scott says, it's almost, I don't think Scott says this, but it's almost willful ignorance that he just doesn't care. He doesn't have the time to, actually, he might have the time to sit down and learn what's been going on there. It's kind of like he's less than 50% there on the issues, and, he really just doesn't care about the conflicts that much. He just kind of understands money and that it doesn't make sense. And also, you have to keep in mind that yet we haven't seen many campaign efforts from him yet, but it's practically 2020 right now. So you have to keep in mind when we were going back and forth, is he reading off the teleprompter or not? If he is reading from it, he's probably reading some lines that some hawk threw in there because he's got to appease to different factions of his base. And, you and I both agree that we hope that he, appeals to more of the anti-war rights and, the veterans that don't want to mess with any of this. I mean, there's a super majority of veterans that don't want to have these forever wars. So it's just kind of hard to really put your finger on, where is this guy going with all this? What is his plan? Does he even have a plan? Is he feeling a lot of pressure from the warhawks and neocons and, any other kind of outside influence? So it's really hard to tell.
Well, that's one thing that actually comes up in his speech towards the very end, criticizing the United States, past foreign policy for not really having a plan. And I think he calls it a path to victory. But what he's talking about is an exit strategy. There's a pretty good article by Adam, I think his last name is pronounced Winooski. I believe it's in War on the Rocks. I know it ran on as a viewpoint at anti-war this week, but talking about how like the U.S. doesn't even know how to get out of a war now. This is somewhat the problem. Well, this is one of the problems that the U.S. had with Syria, minus, harming the jihadists in the first place. But, the mission in Syria was, never authorized by Congress, as many great writers have pointed out this week, including Michael Meharry at the 10th Amendment Center. So, there's not the declaration here is to defeat the Islamists. Say Obama just put some troops in there, and he said, yeah, it's to combat the Islamic State. But then since there's not any kind of like clear mission or directive, that somehow morphs into, and at the same time, those troops are there to check Iranian and Assad and Russia. And so for that reason, they're going to end up staying. And, now Trump, pretty much is openly admitting, and U.S. policy is openly admitting that one of the reasons that we're going to keep troops in Syria is because, Jordan and Israel are requesting that's the case. And it's hard to imagine that you have this guy who talks about American first foreign policy, and that's kind of what he puts first. But that, in one of these speeches, he could just go right ahead and come out and say, hey, we're going to stay in this region for Israel and Jordan. I mean, that I don't understand where America is in Israel. Like, draw the map for that for me, please, on that one. So, yeah, I mean, that was,
man, if any.
That was one of the things. I think that at the beginning he gets into and kind of makes the only newsy kind of statement, and that is he felt that this meant the ceasefire was permanent. That was a word that he had gotten from Erdogan in Turkey. And so, if that's the case, and if that's really what Turkey is putting out, then 2 thumbs up. That's awesome. But at the same time, I will say, Erdogan and Turkey continue to point out, and the Russians have said this as well, that if the armed Syrian Kurds do not leave the buffer zone, then Turkey will, kind of reinvade. And I think Russia has put forward that, they're not going to stand in the way of that. And so it's very interesting, how all the politics are working out. And I don't know if Trump was being either 100% honest on that one, or if, Erdogan was just kind of, blowing smoke and telling Trump what he knew Trump wanted to hear, or if, he's maybe very serious and thinks that, there is this real, potential for, kind of this ceasefire plan to work, and that the Turkish invasion is off. He feels comfortable that Assad and Russia will relatively disarm the Kurds within that region and, kind of cut down the flow of the PKK between Syria and Turkey.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, the Kurds have been a threat to Turkey for a few years now. I mean, I believe the PKK were even considered terrorists at Erdogan. So, I'm not sure how much of that is still going on. But I don't know. Nation state, and people that wish they had their nation state, and they've been having that struggle since the 12th century. Well, they're gonna react the way that you would expect them to react. And I mean, the Kurds in this case, I mean, they're so broken up. So it's just kind of another can of worms where you just really don't know where to start, because there's so many of them, and they've been betrayed left and right. So it's just another case in point why, the United States is in no place to try to fix whatever issue the Kurds are having. And, God bless them. We know whatever humanitarian spiel you're supposed to say about that. Like, as libertarians, Kyle, you and I, we're natural humanitarians. We don't want to cause anyone harm intentionally, but there's nothing that we can do. And Ronald Reagan even said this in his memoir when, he caused troops in southern Lebanon to die for fighting against Hezbollah, was it, for Israel? And, even Ronald Reagan claimed himself, the great Ronald Reagan, a right-winger's, second coming of Jesus, if you could say that. Even Ronald Reagan himself said that these issues are too complex for the United States to really risk being involved with. We can't fix this. And we can go further back to Ronald Reagan. I mean, one of the main reasons the Kurds are so messed up in their geographical situation is because of Sykes-Picot. And so, not even America, but you have British and Britain and France cutting up lines, just like a toddler taking a crayon on like sheetrock on a wall, and thinking, oh, well, these people are going to have this land, they're going to have this land over here, and these borders don't make sense, but it's whatever, it'll work out, and even if it doesn't, then we'll deal with it later. So no one has the authority, especially America, to decide on what works best for anyone in this case.
Well, right. I mean, yeah, that's important for the libertarian theory, and just to pick up on the Donald Trump speech, he's kind of saying, Phil, that this has been going on for decades, and at times he says centuries, and I guess that's probably true that there's been ethnic tensions, whether it's the Ottomans or whoever.
Are you trying to say it sound like
Persians? Controlling.
I'm just damn genius.
Yeah, these are people controlling the Kurdish lands or whatever. And so, I guess he's not wrong in that sense, but, I mean, that's generally, true of a lot of places in the world. And so, I get how, there's some left-wing people who probably cringe at that a little bit, Wayne kind of talks about some of this, American firsterism, and saying that, look, like, this is, awful warring people in evil land. And, it's blood drenched and there's nothing anybody could do to fix it. But look at me, I'm the great savior and America's the great savior and we now have achieved a lasting peace. I mean, I think it is important to point out that's fairly inaccurate and ridiculous, as much as it's
Kyle,
great that the result is, us pulling out troops. But,
are you trying to tell me God did not put him in office?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the whole thing too, is that there's a religious devotion, to the state, and some people, project their Christianity on that as well. A couple, other points in the speech where he really just goes on thick about how it was the Americans when only the Americans, could have kind of fixed this problem. He's saying that at one point, we saved many, many Kurdish lives, which, in one sense, I do think that this probably could have been done better, where the United States somehow gave, the Kurds, like, either more of a warning or, had said like, hey, look, we are leaving and we mean it in 60 days. And so you work out whatever deal you need to now with Assad to like kind of establish this border thing, or else Turkey's coming over. I mean, I have mentioned in the past on the show that there are kind of a couple variables in that. One is that the Syrian Kurds may have, been just kind of negligent in refusing, and the U.S. did kind of tell them like, hey guys, you only got a couple weeks left, and they just, neglected that, although I imagine that Trump would have publicly said that if that was the case. The other thing is that maybe Erdogan called Donald Trump and said, Americans there be damned, I'm coming to take Kobani tomorrow. And, if your troops take up arms against my troops, well, then, that's just the kind of situation, and especially because Erdogan planned to use a lot of these, repurposed jihadist fighters, now that the fight against Assad has been defeated. They're taking a whole bunch of, money from Turkey, and they're Turkish supported. And so, they would have come in and I'm sure gladly taking out, Americans if possible, as they were, slaughtering the Kurds. And, maybe, all this, any violence could have been prevented. But in Trump's speech, he says this very interesting thing that he says he thinks this had to happen. And so that to me suggested a little bit that maybe the Kurds were really reluctant to make a deal. And Trump thinks they had to get a bloody nose, before before they would make a deal. And maybe Donald Trump understood that if he said 60 days, that the reaction in Congress and in the mainstream would be so over the top as it's been. I mean, it's absolutely absurd, the reaction to this thing, that he thought that maybe it wouldn't get done. 60 days is too long. Congress is going to pass all these motions, and then whatever he ends up doing is going to be too watered down. So all those things are possible, but I do think they were some of the more interesting parts of Trump's speech to me.
Yeah, I'm curious to know what you think about him moving more troops down to Saudi Arabia, because of course we can do the foreign policy math. They're just that much closer to power checking Iran. So, do you think that might have been the main like underlying intention? And I really don't know. I'm just I'm sick of like hearing about when the Kurds kind of deal. And at the end of the day, if Iran is really the main threat, I mean that's why we were there to take out Assad in the first place, was because Iran. So I mean, what better excuse to like power check Iran than to move more troops down there? So like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so as far as I could tell, one of the reasons I do think that this was a somewhat rushed and unprepared U.S. withdrawal from Syria is that the Iraqis, pretty quickly put out, once the U.S. said that we're going to stay in Western Iraq. Iraq said no, the U.S. troops are only transitioning through the country. My guess is that these forces probably won't be redeployed to Saudi Arabia or anything like that, because I believe the latest deployment to Saudi Arabia was a lot of more specialized soldiers, so Patriot missile batteries and battalions, and then I think some fighter jets or something like that.
So quick question: were they just repositioned? Like they didn't deploy new troops; they just moved 2,000 to 3,000 troops that were already in the area down to Saudi Arabia? Is that what happened?
Oh, not as far as I'm aware. I thought they were going to be deployed or something like that, but it is possible that they did get relocated from somewhere else. But I was just saying that I don't think that the troops leaving Syria will end up in Saudi Arabia. But it is an interesting aspect here. What happens? This is a big deal with Iraqi sovereignty, and there's a lot of elements in that country who do not want more American soldiers there. And so they may really push to get these American soldiers to just transition through. Maybe that kind of works out well for Donald Trump and what he ultimately wants.
And to that, moving troops closer down there would probably incite more of an uprising in Iraq that's, more than that's already happening, because a lot of that's been going on as of late.
Right.
So I don't know if that's like an intentional like conspiracy of, some hawkish policy to cause another failed uprising in Iraq, because we know, just looking in the history books, or I mean, of course, they're not in any history books that they're reading in school these days, but we can look at past policies of trying to cause uprisings in Iraq and see where those actually end up going. But I don't know. Do you think that might be one reason or something they're trying to work for?
Yeah. I really don't know. Iraq is a very complicated place. And, especially just with the tensions between the U.S. and Iran, and those being the two big influencers in Iraq. There's a couple more things I did want to mention about Trump's speech. One is that he made, again, another push for European countries to retake Islamic State fighters. This is a real problem and a lasting problem. And Donald Trump's had a real hell of a time trying to unload these ISIS fighters on their countries of origin. A lot of the problem is that they're tried in either Iraqi or Syrian courts. My guess is that they, A, don't get fair trials, and B, probably end up getting executed whether they're guilty or not. The other problem is you can't really just leave them out in desert jails in Syria forever, because instability will happen and then they'll get loose. Which is what we've seen, now in northeastern Syria. Although, who knows how many of these ISIS fighters are the real hardcore guys that you're actually, concerned about committing acts of jihad. And, a lot of ISIS fighters were conscripted. It's important to remember that this was a state they had a draft. Well, I don't know if it was a draft, because I think just conscripted like groups of, all 18 plus year old males or something like that. Another, I think, really important point of Trump's speech is how much time he spent on, kind of condemning endless wars and the endless missions and all of that. Like I said in the start of all this, I think that's a really good thread and a really good idea of Donald Trump's. that, he seems generally opposed to endless wars and everything. It just seems that on such a rare occasion can he ever execute the policy. And when he does, it ends up being, kind of crappy, like we end up with Syria, where you have these very sudden decisions that don't seem to have enough cohesion, and probably creates a little bit of extra instability. And then at the same time, you end up with leaving, at least now it seems like about 350 will be the count of U.S. soldiers in Syria, with 150 at Al Tanaf and then 200 guarding oil fields somewhere in eastern Syria. Phil, do you have any other comments on Trump's speech or about what's going on in Syria?
No, I just hope we pull out and we stop jacking with it, because honestly, these people can take care of themselves. As awful and corrupt and disorganized as it is, it's not our problem. It shouldn't be in the first place, and the only reason that we were in Syria to begin with was take out Assad. And why were we there doing that? Because Iran is, global enemy number one. Even though we know that's not the case, we don't need to go into us like crippling their economy, and they don't have any means of actually creating any nuclear threat to us. So they're no threat to anyone except the American empire. So let's get the hell out of Syria and stop this. As Tulsi Gabbard likes to say, a regime change. It's more than that. Let's get out there and everywhere else. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen anytime soon.
All right, Phil, before we wrap up here, cryptos is something that I don't know a lot about, but you are into. And I want to give you a minute to talk about the story that you flagged for me as being pretty important about the U.S. government. Did they inflate and then burst, or just burst a Bitcoin bubble? I thought that the explanation you gave me was pretty interesting.
Yeah, pretty much you nailed it. So this is an article coming from cryptomoney.com. If anyone wants to check it out, it was posted on the 22nd of October this week. But basically, yeah, you nailed it. So the headline is Trump administration popped 2017 Bitcoin bubble. The ex CFTC chairman said. So basically, they were able to do this by going in and trading futures trading. So they went in, sat there, and waited till at some point to buy and sell Bitcoin and inflate it. So it was just kind of like a wow moment where you take a decentralized, stateless solution currency, everything that's anti the boom bust Austrian cycle, and no, it seems like the Feds can manipulate their way into it, just like they did the 2008 collapse of Wall Street. And at the very end of this article, it's very sinister. So this guy Giancarlo, who was running GFI Group Inc., which was an over-the-counter trading desk on Wall Street in 2008. He basically, and I quote, says, coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, the legit criticism of regulators was along the lines of, where were they during the expansion of the real estate mortgage bubble? And why didn't they take steps to pop that bubble when they could have? So basically, in kind of a sinister way, they twisted this in saying, oh, well, the regulators, didn't regulate quite enough. So we had to leave it open to the markets to decide to, pump so much liquidity into crypto at a time and, cause that boom and eventual bust, which is complete hooey, because it was just kind of, speculative futures, like, false liquidity from outside entities, corporations that have, embedded state ties. Really, it was the state that popped the crypto bubble. And it was a little depressing to just kind of see that, they can do it outside of crypto and they can do it inside crypto itself. So, it wasn't, and the last quote down here that Giancarlo says, I believe it shows the power of markets to bring discipline to prices. It wasn't the markets. It was the state. It was state intervention. So it just kind of goes to show how much the state really sees cryptocurrencies as a threat to the U.S. dollar hegemony. And I really think that this comes full circle back to the American empire. And you and I say that the war comes home, but it's people around the world that are looking to cryptocurrencies as, the salvation, because fiat isn't going to last forever. We see people using Dash in Venezuela, and India, I believe, outlawed cryptocurrency. I mean, this can't last forever. So I just thought it was a really crucial story to bring up, that the true enemy is, the war state, but at the end of the day, it's the states as a whole everywhere. So I just thought I would kind of shed light on that. Anyone listening, if you think I kind of butchered this explanation or the story, I'm more than happy to, send it over to Kyle. He can put it in the link in the show notes, or if not, I'll post it on Twitter. I'm Mr. Sue at Mr. Sue on Twitter. And you can just go find it on my timeline, and you can take what you will from it. But I thought I'd bring that story up.
All right, Phil. Well, yeah, no, I mean, that kind of stuff is really important. And, as much as I like to focus on the overseas areas of the empire, what's going on at home, a lot of times is the part of the empire that I think is probably a little bit easier to battle against and understand. And, there used to be a Bitcoins Not Bombs. I don't know if it's still a thing, but they used to have like a spot on Daryl Perry's show. And it would go something along the lines of, if we stop using the government's money, then it's going to be a lot harder to fund their wars. And I do believe that's true. And so it is important to kind of be up to date on what's happening in crypto and, some of the worst kind of things the government's doing to meddle in that. And, creating, just like kind of in the Middle East that, they inflate this massive ISIS problem. And then they had to, in this case, they, arm up the Kurds to take it on. But essentially, they end up overinflating the power of a specific group. And then there has to be some kind of crash back down to reality.
Yeah. And I mean, Ron Paul brings it up all the time. And the Fed. If it wasn't for the Federal Reserve to manipulate currency, artificially lower interest rates, and have people, spend money that they don't have, and having the Fed allow the United States to just pump this liquidity into funding these forever wars, then we wouldn't have this issue. But we do, because it's, the greedy status and the the quote unquote privately organized Federal Reserve. But if we didn't have that, then we wouldn't have the wars. But it's like an evil twisted marriage, the wars and the Federal Reserve. So and really, I've heard Scott and other people say this, that foreign policy is really just policy that happens here, but somewhere else, as awful as it is. But, you've said this in the past, like, just think of what it would be like if, China was coming over here and they were trying to establish dominance in Mexico. We'd kill them, we bomb them, or, someone's done a better example of that. But really, the best way, I think, to get these complex issues on people's radar is to kind of hit them where it hurts the most, and that's their pocketbooks. I'm not the richest dude out there. I don't think you are either. And it's really hard to grasp your head around what's happening in the world. But if you can make people realize, hey, we're actually paying for this, then I think it's worth it. It makes it easier for them to invest their time. Also, read Mike Swanson's The War State. That's also a great place to start too.
All right, Phil, we'll say thank you so much for coming back on the show again. And if I send people one place, it's the libertarianinstitute.org. And you can find both our words there. So that makes it easy. But go ahead and give them your links again one more time, Phil.
Yeah, so on the Twitterverse, I am Mr. Sue at Mr. Sue. If you need help spelling that, it's PSEU. I'm the host of the podcast A Boy Named Sue, where I try to put out an episode at the beginning of the week. Monday or so, and these days I've been busy, so I'll maybe drop another one at the end, Thursday or Friday. But A Boy Named Sue was my show, and I am a editor at the Libertarian Institute. So, the majority of the stories that you read up there, we get a lot of great submissions. So if you want to send those over to me at pgibbs@pgibbs.io or mr.pseudolect with 1L at gmail.com. You got any entry submission ideas, go ahead and send them my way. And yeah, Kyle, as always, thanks for having me on the show, man. And I really appreciate all the good work you do. And yeah, just keep at it. And thanks.
Thank you.